Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Patrick Moore. We pick it up now as he continues to share his opinions on GMOs, climate, the environment, and NGOs that he says have little regard for the truth, but are rather peddling an agenda. Freeman Dyson told me, he said, well, just look around the world right now, it's greener. And yet then when I see that happen, like...
That's a proven fact.
Yeah, well, the reforestation or the regrowth in the Amazon has been phenomenal. Then I read comments in the New York Times, like, well, it's ridiculous that this should have happened in the first place. You can't be like replanting or recovering from what was an environmental disaster by putting more carbon into the atmosphere. It was as though you cannot have good news. I find it quite remarkable. I get to the point where like the voices are so loud that I'm going, okay, how do I find where there actually is truth?
Well, where there's truth is that carbon is the basis of all life on Earth. Mm-hmm. And where there's truth is that carbon dioxide is the source of that carbon for all life on Earth. And it's also true that for the last 600 million years, of which we have a reasonable record, CO2 has been declining in the global atmosphere to the point where at the peak of the last glaciation, when the oceans absorb more CO2 than they do when they're warm, it was cold, CO2 dropped to 180 parts per million.
Yeah.
And that is only 30 parts per million above the death of plants. And it is surmised because there's an ash layer associated with these peaks in cold during the glaciations.
It's only 30 parts per million above the death of plants?
Yes, and it's very clear from my paper that I've just published that if we had not intervened by putting the balance back into the carbon cycle, which was out of balance, it's a really interesting story because it's life itself that has sucked the CO2 out of the atmosphere over the millennia and put it into fossil fuels, but that's a very minor part of it. Mm-hmm. The big part of it is what's called carbonaceous rocks, limestone, chalk, and marble. And those are the remains of shells of marine calcifying organisms. And the calcium carbonate is what those shells are made out of. Mm-hmm. The carbon in the calcium carbonate is from CO2 that the oceans absorbed from the atmosphere. And that is what we're fracking for oil and gas, are those marine deposits of the shells of coccolithophores, which are minute phytoplankton that learned how to build. Many marine organisms, started 500 million years ago, many marine organisms learned how to control calcification. Mm-hmm. Biomineralization is the general term for it. Our bones, for example, are a case of biomineralization. But we did it for our skeletal structure, so we could stand up. Mm-hmm. The reason marine organisms did it was to basically build an armor plating around themselves, like clams and mussels and coral reefs and crabs. All of these are calcareous. And the calcium comes from the seawater. The carbonate comes from the air and is dissolved in the water. And so these huge deposits of shale are actually calcium carbonate. They are the shells of those plankton. The oil and gas is the organic matter of the living plankton that died and fell on the bottom of the ocean. But 100 million billion tons of carbonaceous rock represent carbon dioxide pulled out of the atmosphere. And because the Earth has cooled over the millennia, nature is no longer putting CO2 into the atmosphere to offset this. So the curves are there to look at on the internet. You can see it. CO2 has been declining to where it is getting close to the end of plant life. And another 1.8 million years, if you just take that line and draw it straight down, another 1.8 million years, life would begin to die on planet Earth for lack of CO2.
Not because of an excess.
There is no such thing as an excess of CO2 under any real-world circumstance.
Well, the message out there is pretty clear that there is such a thing.
No, there isn't. Because it's proven fact, for example, that greenhouse growers they actually buy CO2 in bottles.
Well, I know, they pump it in.
They pump it in to get it up to 1,000 parts per million. The optimum CO2 level for plant growth, which, when you think about it, is the basis of all the animal life on Earth. Every insect, every vertebrate, every invertebrate, all the things that are not plants depend on the plants for their existence. The sugars the plants produced through photosynthesis are the energy supply for the whole world. What are those sugars made out of? Water and carbon dioxide. Those are and when you burn fossil fuels, which are the result of photosynthesis, what do you get? Water and carbon dioxide and some contaminants, which we know how to clean. But that's what basically comes out of the tailpipe, is water and CO2. Plants take those two things and turn them into glucose, sugar, and everything else goes from there. So we should care about the plants. And if we cared about the plants, we'd put the CO2 up to 1,000, and it's only at 400 now. And actually, it may not be possible for us to get it to 1,000 just due to the fact that there's only so much fossil fuel. But the other interesting thing is the carbonaceous rocks, limestone, that's what we make cement with. And when we make cement, about 5% of the CO2 emissions from humans today in this world is from cement production. By burning calcium carbonate and creating calcium oxide, which is lime, which is the major constituent of cement, and CO2 goes up. So we can actually burn lime with solar energy. By focusing solar energy, solar heat onto lime, we can burn it. So even if we run out of fossil fuels and the CO2 starts going down again, say 3 million years from now, humans will still be here 3 million years from now. You see, I'm that optimistic.
Well, we've only been around for about 120, 130,000 years as Homo sapiens.
As Homo sapiens, yes, but the primates have been here since the 65 million years or so. So primates began a long time ago. And no doubt we will evolve as time, especially because of our technology making life so easy compared to what it was when average life age was 25, 30.
Going back to 1750, which you cited earlier.
Yes. So
I don't want to go back there.
So what we can do is we can keep the CO2 in the global atmosphere at a good level for plants for hundreds of billions of years, because that carbonaceous rock, which we can easily dig out of the ground and burn, either to make cement or eventually maybe just to make CO2, so that our plants will grow, we can do that into the foreseeable future.
I got to get you to hang on for just 1 second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
Okay, so what you're saying throws into question, like, well, why should we even bother, like, trying to cut back on the burning of coal for power generation, for electrical power generation, if it's the #1 source of CO2 into the atmosphere? Why get so worried about it? And then
I'm not against using coal to make electricity, but, and there's a big but, 2 big buts here. One, natural gas is a lot cleaner.
Yes.
And if there's natural gas, why not use it? 2,
so cleaner in the other emissions that come from the burning of the fuel.
They're trying to make out now that natural gas has more CO2 emissions than coal. They're doing this out of the States. It's the anti-fracking movement, which is also based on nothing, like the anti-GMO movement is.
Well, it has more methane, doesn't it?
Methane, yes.
Yes,
They're trying to change the name of natural gas to methane, because that's its chemical name. But it is natural, and they don't like it to be called natural anymore. So now they're calling it methane and saying that it's destroying the climate. It's another fabrication. But back to coal. The reason not to burn so much coal is because in the future we're going to need liquid fuel. When the gas and oil are from marine deposits, the coal is from land-based trees and that. There's a lot of it. When the oil and gas runs out and transportation depends on having a gas or liquid, we're not going to end up shoveling coal into our car.
Yeah, we're not going back to the steam
So
engine.
coal can't go in a pipe is the problem. It can't go through a hose. Whereas liquefying coal is going to be possible, well, it's being done now in South Africa. There's a huge facility there. When South Africa was under the embargo, they don't have any oil or gas. Well, they do now offshore, I believe, but they didn't then. They're turning coal into fuel for cars, and this can be done. And so it would be a good idea to save the coal for that, because transportation needs liquid or gas, and coal can be made into liquid or gas. Especially with high temperature nuclear, you can actually turn 100% of the coal into liquid fuel with no CO2 emissions or virtually no CO2 emissions in the process. Whereas now 2/3 of the coal is used for producing heat and hydrogenation, and you really only get 1/3 of the coal turned into fuel. It's still worth them doing it because there's no other alternative. You know, during the Second World War, Germany ran out of oil. And what did they end up doing? Wood gasification trailers towed behind their buses and cars, and on the roof of their cars they'd put wood gas. And we're not going back to wood gas.
No.
That's for sure. What we're going to go for in
Yeah, I've had people tell me, "Oh no, that's the future."
wood gas?
I'm thinking, how are we going to do? How are we going to be able to do that?
No, if the problem, here's how I put it. If we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, there wouldn't be a tree left on this planet in 2 years.
Because we need them for fuel.
Because we'd have to burn them for fuel.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do that.
No, we don't. So, you've spent your entire life in this. You are a scientist. You have a PhD in ecology. You've thought about and focused on carbon for more than 25 years now as a focus of your work. Does it not cause you frustration that even you keep running into so many obstacles in getting people to listen to what you have to say?
Well, what has happened is a new cult religion has been born on the issue of climate. I think it might, some people say it's because Christianity and the other religions have been, you know, people sort of go like, there isn't actually an old guy with a white beard. This is all bunk, right? And so secularism has come to rule.
Away.
But people, it seems that people still need a religion. And so the trouble with the climate issue is it's not only a new religious movement, it's a new political movement, and the scientific establishment, because of the huge taxpayer money going into it, is totally bought into it, and so is the political establishment, and so are the business. I mean, even the big oil companies are pandering to the politicians on this subject. The biggest problem we have on climate is the fossil fuel companies themselves will not defend themselves and will not even listen to an alternative explanation of this situation.
This is our second break, but I'm anxious to get back to this. We'll be back in a moment.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
CO2 is the food of life. It is the foundation of all life. Is that hard to understand?
Well, it seems to be. I try to explain that to people, and I get blank stares and
yes,
outright hostility. Because
they have actually an ideology or a religious belief system that makes them reject even the basic truth that carbon dioxide is the most important food for life on Earth, along with water. Those two things are the most important. The problem is CO2 is invisible, but CNN lies. They put a picture of the smog in Beijing on the TV while talking about climate change and CO2.
Those are two different things.
They don't seem to think so. It was sort of like the headline during Fukushima, one of my favorite headlines, "Nuclear crisis deepens as bodies wash ashore." That was the headline. Now, the bodies were washing ashore from the tsunami.
From the tsunami,
yeah.
Yes.
But then I don't think the Fukushima nuclear plant caused the tsunami. But, you know, that's how, so they're making it seem as though CO2 is responsible for the smog in Beijing, when actually it's particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, NOx, SOx, all these things.
And those all need to be addressed.
They do.
That's a real problem.
And the Chinese know that, you know. The beauty of the situation is that a full third of the world's population, right between China and India, I think maybe they're at least a third of the world's population, they do not buy into this climate thing. They play along for the sake of optics, I guess you'd call it, political optics, in the same way that when Stephen Harper went to the Indonesia summit of the G7 last September, he agreed to a statement that said fossil fuels should be phased out by the end of the century. He's a conservative from Alberta, and he agreed to that. It's a world that is headed in a really bad direction for the future of our children, and they're making it seem like the people who support energy are the ones who are going to drive us into extinction or oblivion. And the truth comes out when you say, okay, you're against fossil fuels. How do we replace them? With nuclear energy? No. With hydroelectric energy? No. Those are actually the only two other technologies that can produce large-scale continuous power. They say, no, we'll do it with wind and solar.
Well, the power demand over the next 30 years, the increase is going to be 2.5 times what we're consuming right now.
By 2100, it'll be 2.5 times what it is now.
Yeah.
And where are you going to get that energy? Obviously, nuclear energy is going to play a huge role in the future. China's building 100 nuclear plants. India's building 50. Russia's building 50. Vietnam's going nuclear. Saudi Arabia, with all its oil, is going nuclear. And they're doing it because it makes sense. Because it's clean, reliable, and in the long run, cost effective. High capital cost up front, but it's like buying a Toyota versus buying whatever. You're going to have a car that goes 400,000 kilometers instead of one that only goes 2.
Yeah.
And that's the same with nuclear. And the gas will play an ever-increasing role.
I love your passion, but unfortunately I've got to take a quick commercial break here. We'll be back in a moment.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So if on the environmental movement side these days, which you help to create, but their fear is that, the term I've heard is climageddon, is the extinction of the world as we know it because we're going in this direction. What's your fear?
Well, my fear is that they will succeed in their agenda, which is to eliminate 98% of all the world's energy supply. And, you know, we don't just need food. That's our personal energy to keep our bodies running. But they're against so many things that we need in order to survive. And yet, at the same time, they're saying, if we don't stop using these things, we'll all die. That's not right. That is simply not correct. I mean, fossil fuels actually have contributed immensely to the wealth of this world, but they're against wealth. They actually, I don't know what their vision is, going back to hoeing your own weeds in your front yard or something in your little mud hut. You know, it seems to me that's where they're taking us if we listen to them. And so the hypocrisy of the situation is rampant. I've been tweeting, they want to put us in jail for being skeptical of the climate scam. I want to put them in jail for using fossil fuels. I want to catch them. I want to have an army of people going out and catching these guys using fossil fuels. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, would take about 3 seconds to catch him, right? He should be tried and convicted of hypocrisy or something, because he's saying we should stop using fossil fuels with a 350-foot yacht and private jets. You know, I'm saying if people come into a fueling station, they should be asked. There should be someone there with a clipboard. Show your driver's license. Are you in favor of a pipeline and trucks bringing fuel to this service station? If they say no, they refuse service. Right? Just like that. Why not? I mean, how can we allow this rampant hypocrisy of 40,000 people flying into the largest private jet port in Europe at Paris and having a great big bash and partying and drinking all night and talking about how they're saving the world, and not one science subject comes up through the whole thing. It's all about how are we going to rip off people for $100 billion a year and give it to Mugabe, you know. He was the first one to apply for the climate fund because he says climate change has ruined the agriculture in his country, when in fact it was because he kicked out all the people who knew how to farm. So this is what's happening in the world today, and I don't like it, and that's why I'm fighting really hard to bring some sense to the situation. And my website is ecosense.me, M-E. I'm easy to find. I have papers and videos on these subjects I've been talking about, especially the CO2 issue. Prager University, if you Google Prager University, Patrick Moore, you'll find five-minute lectures that I did with them on a number of subjects, one of which is why I left Greenpeace, also on GMOs, CO2, climate, and trees. Trees Are the Answer is a book I wrote that I'm republishing now, because trees are so important to the future of this world, and yet especially from the point of view of producing a renewable resource like this table. And basically the green movement is opposed to forestry. They like trees, they love trees, but they don't want them to be used. And so it's like they hate fossil fuels, so that's very straightforward, except they use them every day themselves in their daily lives. And they should be called out. Every second of the day they should be called out for the hypocrisy of not doing what they say. They say there's too many people, you know. Where's the lineup of those guys to go away? Why don't they go away if they think there's too many people and contribute to the cause, you know? And so
you are frustrated.
It's very frustrating to see such hypocrisy in the world where people are continuing to live a good life. Oil has produced our longevity, our prosperity, and our personal freedom. Now, what is wrong with those three things? Living longer, being wealthier, more prosperous. I mean, I'm not a profligate spender. I don't have a lot of money. I have a nice house. I have a lovely family. I have a good lifestyle. Is that evil? Apparently so. You know, I mean, there are people who go way over the top, like Leonardo DiCaprio, for example. He's got a stupid, lavish lifestyle. He could probably tone it down a hair, you know, and not spend $1 million a week or whatever he's doing. Yeah. But I really do believe that most of the environmental issues that are at the top, anti-nuclear, anti-GMO, the climate scare, Climate Inc. or Climate Incorporated, which is a huge convergence of interests among elites that is driving the political agenda today, which is totally misguided. I think actually we've done a pretty good job and we need to keep refining it. I mean, sustainable development or sustainability is not an end game. It's about continuing to improve our relationship with nature and each other. And this is actually, the last 50 years has been the most peaceful period in the history of civilization for 2,000 years or more or whatever. People have been warring with each other all through history. And even though there's skirmishes and small wars, it's nothing compared to what it was for the whole history of civilization. So I have a huge amount of optimism for the future. I just wish people would stop telling our kids the world's coming to an end and that we're evil, you know, that we're the enemies of nature. Is kind of like, that's where I departed Greenpeace. It was when the environmental movement turned from being humanitarian to stop nuclear war, to stop toxics in the environment, which were all dangerous to people, to becoming anti-human, basically, and saying that humans are the enemies of the earth. And I don't believe that. We're part of the earth.
Thank you very much for coming in and doing this.
Thank you, Stuart.
Appreciate it. Thanks.